U.S. handed over some $368 million in humanitarian aid to Ukraine. The latest round of aid, which follows arms shipments, will give millions of Ukrainians access to food, drinking water, medical care, and shelter. The United States has provided Ukraine with a new package of humanitarian aid worth nearly $368 million to support people affected by the bloody war unleashed by Russia against its neighboring country. The announcement was made Saturday by Secretary of State Antony Blinken. In a statement released today on the State Department website, he said more than 11 million people, more than a quarter of Ukraine's population, have been displaced by the Russian invasion to date, and 15.7 million Ukrainians are in need of assistance. To address this crisis, the U.S. has handed over more than $1.28 billion in humanitarian aid to the Ukrainian people since the war began. Almost $288 million was allocated through the State Department and more than $80 million through the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID. Thanks to this aid, millions of Ukrainians will receive food, drinking water, cash assistance, affordable housing, and emergency medical care. As Russia's brutal war against Ukraine enters its fifth month, we continue to urge Russia to immediately end hostilities, facilitate unimpeded access for humanitarian aid to Ukraine, and provide continued safe passage for those who want to leave for safety, said Antony Blinken. We commend our allies and partners who have sheltered people fleeing the war, and we welcome the European Union's decision to grant temporary protection status to Ukrainian citizens, providing them with work permits and access to housing and other services. U.S. and Chinese foreign ministers meet for the first time since last October. President Biden is considering lifting tariffs on a number of Chinese goods to curb rising inflation in the U.S. before the November midterm elections, when control of Congress will take center stage. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi met Saturday for their first face-to-face talks since October. The meeting came after the conclusion of a meeting at the G20, where a senior U.S. diplomat led an effort to pressure Russia over the war in Ukraine. U.S. officials report that the themes of Antony Blinken's meeting with Wang Yi in Bali, Indonesia, including a morning session of talks and a working lunch, were keeping the troubled U.S. relationship with China stable and preventing the relationship from inadvertently escalating into conflict. There is nothing that can replace face-to-face diplomacy, and in such a challenging and important relationship that has developed between the United States and China, there is a lot to discuss, Blinken explained to reporters at the beginning of the meeting. We are very much looking forward to a productive and constructive conversation, he added. Blinken was expected to recall China's warning not to support Russia's war in Ukraine, and the two sides would begin discussing contentious issues, including Taiwan, China's claims to the South China Sea, its expanding influence in the Pacific, human rights, and trade tariffs. Nevertheless, both sides are interested in maintaining a stable relationship. Both Blinken and other U.S. officials confirmed that U.S. President Joe Biden and Chinese President Xi Jinping are expected to say so again in the near future. China and the United States are two leading powers. There needs to be a normal exchange of views between the two countries, Wang Yi told reporters. At the same time, we need to negotiate to ensure that this relationship continues to develop in the right direction, he said. Daniel Russell, a senior U.S. diplomat in charge of U.S. foreign policy in East Asia under former President Barack Obama, who has close contacts with Biden administration officials, shared that a key goal of the talks is to explore the possibility of a face-to-face meeting between Biden and Xi on the sidelines of the G20 summit in Bali in November. The United States calls China its main strategic rival and is concerned that it might one day try to take over the democratically self-governing island of Taiwan, using Russia's aggression against Ukraine as an example. Senior U.S. diplomat for East Asia Daniel Kritenbrink said Tuesday that he expected a frank exchange with Wang, and said it would be another opportunity to convey our expectations about what the U.S. wants from China, and what the PRC should not do in the context of the war in Ukraine. Shortly before Russia invaded Ukraine on February 24, Beijing and Moscow announced a borderless partnership. U.S. officials confirmed that they did not see China evading U.S. sanctions against Russia or supplying it with military hardware. However, China has refused to condemn Russia's actions and has criticized the drastic sanctions. U.S. officials warned their Chinese counterparts of possible consequences, including sanctions, if China began to provide material support to Russia in its war against Ukraine. The Kremlin calls this war a special military operation to demilitarize Ukraine, while Kyiv insists it is an imperial-style land grab by Moscow. Despite the strategic rivalry between Washington and Beijing, the world's two largest economies remain major trading partners. President Biden is considering eliminating tariffs on a number of Chinese goods to curb rising inflation in the U.S. before the November midterm elections, when control of Congress will come into focus. Elon Musk pulls out of Twitter deal. The world's biggest businessman intends to interrupt the process of acquiring the social networking site Twitter, which was estimated to be worth $44 billion. Elon Musk, Tesla's chief executive and one of the world's richest men, said Friday that he is terminating the $44 billion purchase of Twitter because the company, which owns the social network of the same name, has violated several provisions of the merger agreement. Twitter chairman Bret Taylor said in a blog post that the board plans to sue to enforce provisions of the agreement. Twitter's board of directors is committed to closing the deal at the price and terms agreed to with Mr. Musk, he wrote. In a statement, Musk's attorneys pointed out that the internet platform Twitter failed or refused to respond to numerous requests for information about the platform's fake or spam accounts, which is fundamental to the company's effective conduct of business. Twitter is in material breach of numerous provisions of this agreement by apparently making false and misleading statements that Mr. Musk relied upon in deciding to enter into the merger agreement, the statement said. Musk also said he was pulling out of the deal because Twitter had fired top executives and one-third of the platform's talent attraction department, violating Twitter's commitment to keep the material components of its current business organization virtually intact. Musk's decision is likely to lead to a protracted legal battle between the billionaire and the San Francisco-based company, which has been on the market for 16 years.